The broken air machines made horrible wheezing sounds as they slowly died. Commander Talin stood in front of his control screens, watching everything fall apart. Red warning lights flashed everywhere. The station's walls were breaking, the big guns had stopped working, and the escape ships were being destroyed one by the alien monsters. "Sir, we lost sections 12 through 18, his radio operator said, her voice shaking with fear. "The regular people in the lower levels, they're all dead now." The whole station shook violently as another huge alien creature grabbed onto the outside walls. Talin looked through the thick window and saw something that gave him nightmares. Hundreds of living alien ships floated in space around them. These weren't normal metal ships. They looked like giant sea creatures with glowing veins running through their bodies. They made terrible screaming sounds that somehow traveled through empty space. These monsters had been eating their way through the outer planets for months. Every world they touched became empty and dead. Now they had come for Kepler Station, the last safe place in this part of the galaxy. "How many escape ships got away?" Talin asked, even though he was scared to hear the answer. "Only 17 out of 43, sir. The alien hunters are faster than our ships." Talin felt sick to his stomach. 300,000 people used to live and work on Kepler Station. Families, scientists, traders, children, all of them had called this place home. Now only 60,000 were still alive, hiding in the center of the station, while the aliens slowly broke through their defenses. The station had been built to be safe. Thick walls, powerful weapons, and the best shields money could buy. But none of it mattered now. The Void Swarm was different from any enemy they had ever fought. These creatures didn't use normal weapons or follow normal rules. They were like a disease that spread from world to world, eating everything in their path. Talin watched another section of the station turn red on his screen. That meant the walls had broken and the aliens were getting inside. He could hear the emergency alarms getting louder and louder. Soon those sounds would stop forever. The defense turrets that had protected them for so long were now silent. The alien creatures had figured out how to destroy them without taking much damage. Some of the bioships were as big as city blocks, with teeth and claws that could tear through metal like paper. "Sir, the aliens are breaking through level 5 now," another officer reported. "Our soldiers are falling back, but they can't hold much longer." Talin nodded slowly. He had sent messages asking for help weeks ago, but no one was coming. The other Alliance worlds were too far away or too busy protecting themselves. Kepler Station was alone, and everyone knew it. The lights flickered as another explosion shook the station. Through the speakers, they could hear the awful sounds of battle, energy weapons firing, people screaming, and the horrible roars of the alien creatures as they hunted through the corridors. This was it. The end of everything they had built. The end of the last hope for organized resistance in the Outer Rim. When Kepler Station fell, the aliens would have a clear path to the inner worlds where billions more people lived. Talin looked at his remaining officers. They were all scared, but they were still doing their jobs. Good people who deserved better than this. The emergency klaxons continued their death song as another section was breached. Something strange happened at the edge of the solar system. Space itself seemed to twist and bend, creating ripples like dropping a stone in water. The alien bioships stopped their attack on Kepler Station and turned to look at this weird distortion. They had never seen anything like it before. Then a ship appeared from nowhere. But this wasn't just any ship. It was a complete mess. The hull looked like it had been through 1,000 battles, with patches of different colored metal welded all over it. Some pieces looked like they came from alien ships, others from destroyed space stations. The whole thing looked like it should fall apart at any moment. On Kepler Station, Communications Officer Yun couldn't believe what she was seeing on her screen. "Sir, I'm getting a radio signal. It's using old Earth military codes. Commander." Talin felt his heart skip a beat. That can't be right. The humans were all killed 3 years ago. We saw the reports ourselves. But then a voice came through the radio, clear as day. "This is Colonel Min Ho Kim of the Terran Resistance. Kepler Station, are you guys still alive over there?" The whole bridge went dead quiet. Everyone knew the terrible stories about Earth, how the humans had been the first major planet to fall. to the Void Swarm. How they had fought so hard and so viciously that the aliens decided to hunt down every single human in the galaxy. The swarm had made it their personal mission to wipe out the entire human race. The stories said that humans didn't fight like other species. When most aliens faced the swarm, they tried to run away or surrender. But humans, they fought like wild animals backed into a corner. They used tactics that made no sense, weapons that shouldn't work, and strategies that seemed completely insane. The swarm had been so disturbed by human fighting methods that they decided humans were too dangerous to leave alive. "Colonel Kim," Talon said carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is Commander Talon. I need to make sure you're really who you say you are." The human's voice crackled back through the radio, and there was something in his tone that made everyone's skin crawl. It wasn't fear or desperation. It was something much worse. It was the voice of someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "Commander, I've got 43 human soldiers on this piece of junk ship. We've got enough weapons to make the swarm think twice about messing with us. And we've got absolutely nothing left to lose. You want proof that we're real? Just watch what we do next." The human ship was tiny compared to the massive alien bioships. It was barely the size of a small escort vessel, and it looked like it, was held together with spare parts and hope. But what happened next made everyone on Kepler Station question everything they thought they knew about space combat. The little human ship didn't try to sneak around the edges of the battle. It didn't look for a safe way to approach the station. Instead, it dove straight into the middle of the swarm formation, heading directly for the biggest and most dangerous alien ships. Talon watched his tactical display in complete shock. The human ship was moving in ways that violated every rule of space combat he had ever learned. It was spinning, diving, weaving between the alien ships like it was dancing instead of fighting. And somehow, impossibly, it was winning. The Void Swarm bioships were trying to catch the human vessel, but it was too fast, too unpredictable. Every time they thought they had it cornered, the ship would do something completely unexpected and escape. And all the while it was shooting at them with weapons that seemed to hurt the aliens in ways that regular weapons couldn't. 12 minutes later, the human ship barely made it to Kepler Station's docking area. Smoke poured from its damaged engines, and sparks flew from broken electrical systems. Behind it in space, 3 massive alien bioships were now just floating chunks of dead meat. The other alien ships looked confused and scared, like they couldn't understand what had just happened to them. The docking bay doors opened with a loud hiss, and 43 people in battle armor walked out. Their gear looked like it had been through hell, dented, scratched, and patched up with whatever materials they could find. Some of the armor pieces didn't even match, like they had been taken from different armies and cobbled together. Colonel Min-Ho Kim took off his helmet, and Commander Talon had to try not to stare. The man's face looked like a medical textbook, showing what happens to people in war. Burn scars ran down the left side of his head, and his eyes had a cold, distant look that made everyone uncomfortable. These were the eyes of someone who had watched the world end. "Nice place you had here," Kim said, looking around the damaged docking bay. Broken pipes leaked steam, and emergency lights flickered on and off. Too bad nobody thought about the tactical problems. Talon felt a bit insulted. "Colonel, with all due respect, you've only bought us maybe an hour. The swarm has thousands of ships out there. We can't possibly win against those numbers." Before Kim could answer, one of his soldiers spoke up. Sergeant Hyojin Park was a small woman, but her armor was covered in burn marks from energy weapons. She looked like she had been in more fights than most people could survive. "Commander, has anyone ever explained to you how humans fight wars?" she asked. Talon shook his head. And she continued with a grim smile. "Most species fight to protect things, their homes, their families, their stuff. Humans, we fight to make the enemy hurt as much as possible." Kim was already looking at a small computer on his wrist, studying the station's layout like he was planning something. "Lieutenant Dayun, I want explosive charges placed in sections 7, 15, and 23. When the aliens break through those areas, we're going to give them a very nasty surprise." One of the station's engineers stepped forward, looking horrified. "Sir, those are civilian areas with normal air pressure. There might still be people alive in there." Kim looked at the engineer with those cold, dead eyes. Those were civilian areas. Now they're traps. Anyone still alive in those sections is going to die anyway. The swarm just hasn't gotten around to killing them yet. The human soldiers started moving around the station with scary efficiency. They knew exactly what they were doing, like they had done this many times before. Talon watched them work and felt a growing sense of dread. These humans weren't preparing to defend Kepler Station like normal soldiers would. They were turning the entire station into a giant weapon. The humans moved through the corridors with purpose, carrying bags full of explosives and strange devices. They talked to each other in short, clipped sentences, using military codes that Talon didn't understand. But he could tell from their body language that they had a plan that probably involved a lot of explosions and death. What exactly are you planning to do? Talon asked Kim. Kim looked up from his computer with that unsettling smile. We're going to teach the swarm why they should have made sure we were all dead before they celebrated. At exactly 3:47 in the morning, station time, the final alien attack began. The Void Swarm had gathered all their biggest creatures for one massive push. Bioforms as large as transport shuttles smashed through the station's weakened walls, exactly where Colonel Kim had said they would. But what these monsters found waiting for them wasn't a group of scared defenders hiding behind barricades. It was a carefully planned nightmare. In Section 7, dozens of alien creatures poured through the broken wall into what looked like an empty hallway. The corridor seemed abandoned, with no signs of human defenders anywhere. The bioforms spread out, thinking they had found an easy path deeper into the station. That's when 50 of them had squeezed into the narrow space. Corporal Jae-sung had been waiting patiently in a hidden alcove, watching his motion sensors. The moment exactly 50 aliens were trapped in the corridor, he pressed a button on his remote detonator. Explosive charges went off at both ends of the hallway, sealing the exits completely. Then, the real horror began. Jae-sung had rewired the station's damaged power conduits to flood the sealed corridor with superheated plasma, the same burning gas that powered the station's engines. The temperature in that hallway instantly jumped to over 3,000 degrees. Section 7 complete kill, Jae-sung reported over the radio, his voice as calm as if he was ordering coffee. Through the station's air vents, everyone could hear the inhuman screams of the dying aliens. But the screams weren't just echoing through Kepler Station. Specialist So Young had done something that nobody thought was possible. She had hacked into the station's communication system and was broadcasting those death screams directly into the Void Swarm's shared mind network. For the first time in recorded history, the alien formation in space began to act confused and uncertain. Ships that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly started hesitating and changing direction randomly. They're actually feeling fear, So Young reported with a dark smile. Their hive mind is trying to understand what just happened to their advanced team, and it's freaking them out. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Da-Yoon had taken over the medical bay and turned it into something that would have given normal people nightmares. She was using surgical lasers meant for operations and life support equipment to build weapons that no civilized species would ever think of creating. The smell of melted metal and chemical compounds filled the air as she worked. Ready for phase 2, Colonel, she announced. Kim stood at the tactical display, watching as more swarm forces approached the other breach points in the station's hull. But now they were moving slower, more carefully. The screams from Section 7 had shaken their confidence. So you want to know the difference between humans and every other species the swarm has eaten? Kim asked Commander Talon, who was watching everything with a mixture of horror and fascination. What's that, Colonel? Kim's scarred face showed no emotion as he answered. Every other species fights because they want to survive. We learn to fight to make absolutely sure the enemy dies first, even if we don't make it out alive. On the tactical screen, more alien bioforms were gathering at the breach points, but they weren't charging in blindly anymore. They had learned to be afraid of what humans could do when they had nothing left to lose. 3 hours into the battle, the station's hallways looked like a nightmare. Blood from humans and acidic goo from dead aliens covered the floors, making everything slippery and dangerous. The humans were winning, but every victory came at a terrible cost. Private Dong-hyun was supposed to be dead. A bioform had sprayed him with acid that ate through his armor and dissolved half his chest. Any normal person would have collapsed and died in seconds. But Dong Hyun kept fighting for 27 more minutes, holding Corridor C7 by himself while his squad mates fell back to safety. He fired his rifle with one hand while trying to hold his torn body together with the other. When his ammunition finally ran out, he didn't surrender or try to run. Instead, he pulled the pin on his last grenade and smiled as he brought down the entire section of the corridor, burying himself and 15 alien creatures under tons of twisted metal. In the hydroponics bay, Sergeant Seung-min had turned the place where food was grown into a death trap. She and her squad used the big water tanks meant for growing plants as giant acid baths, pushing the alien creatures into them and watching them dissolve. The screams echoed through the station as bioform after bioform fell into the deadly pools. But the aliens learned fast. They sent in armored creatures that couldn't be dissolved by the acid, so Seung-min did something even more crazy. She opened all the oxygen valves in the bay, filling the air with pure oxygen until it was ready to explode. Then she fired a single shot from her energy weapon. The explosion was so powerful, it could be felt 3 levels away. Everything within 50 meters was instantly vaporized. The aliens, the plants, the equipment, and Seung-min herself. "Seung-min's gone," reported Corporal Kyung-ho over the radio. His voice was steady and calm, even though he had just lost a friend. She took 47 of them with her. Colonel Kim was running the battle from the tactical center, his fingers flying over the control panels. But his hands were covered in his own blood. An alien claw had ripped his shoulder open so deep that bone was showing through the wound. He didn't seem to notice or care. He had been slowly dying for 3 years, ever since Earth was destroyed, and pain was just another part of his daily routine. "All units fall back to level 5. Get ready for Broken Spear final phase," he ordered. Commander Talin watched the humans retreat and couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't a normal military withdrawal. The humans weren't running away in panic or trying to save themselves. They were conducting what could only be called a mobile slaughter. Each position they abandoned became a death trap for the aliens who tried to occupy it. Every corridor they left behind was rigged with explosives or turned into some kind of killing zone. Bodies of both humans and aliens covered their path, but for every human who died, at least 10 aliens died with them. "How are you doing this?" Talin whispered, watching the tactical display show the impossible mathematics of the battle. Kim looked at him with those dead, tired eyes and gave a simple answer. "Practice. We've been doing this every day since Earth burned 3 years ago. The humans weren't just fighting a battle. They were demonstrating what happened when an entire species learned that survival meant making the enemy pay a price so high they would regret ever starting the fight. When the surviving defenders reached the station's central hub, they saw something that shouldn't have been possible. While explosions shook the walls and alien creatures howled in the distance, Specialist Eugene had built a complete science laboratory, using nothing but spare parts and pieces of dead alien bioforms. She had cables running everywhere, connecting broken computer terminals to alien body parts that were still glowing with strange energy. The whole setup looked like something a mad scientist would create, but somehow it was working. Green lights blinked on makeshift control panels, and alien tissue samples pulsed in glass containers. "I figured out how their brain network works." Eugene shouted over the noise of another explosion that made the ceiling shake. Chunks of metal fell around her, but she didn't even flinch. "Their hive mind uses these special proteins that are connected across space. If I can create a feedback loop in their system—" "Speak normal words, Specialist," Colonel Kim interrupted, checking how many bullets he had left in his rifle. Only 12 shots remained. Eugene wiped sweat and alien goo from her face. "I can turn their own communication system against them, so make their shared brain destroy itself from the inside." It was incredible to watch. The alien scientists on the station had spent years trying to understand how the Void Swarm worked, and they had barely scratched the surface. But Eugene, working with broken equipment while bullets flew overhead, had figured out in just a few hours what should have taken decades of research. The secret wasn't that humans were smarter than other species. It was that humans could think clearly and come up with new ideas even when everything was falling apart around them. Other species needed perfect laboratory conditions and years of careful study. Humans just needed pressure and desperation. Doctor. Chethmar, one of the alien scientists, stared at Eugene's improvised laboratory in amazement. At first he had thought human intelligence was just primitive guessing, but now he was helping her fine-tune the equipment with shaking hands. "The frequency is locked in," he announced, his voice trembling with excitement and fear. "But someone has to physically go to the main network node and input the signal by hand." Kim looked at his tactical screen. The main network node was located in Section 1 of the station. According to his sensors, about 300 alien bioforms were currently occupying that area. It was the most heavily defended part of the entire station. "That's a death mission," Commander Talin said quietly. "Nobody could possibly fight through that many aliens and survive." Lieutenant Wu Jin looked up from checking his weapon and shrugged. "Everything we've done today has been a death mission. The trick is to make sure more of them die than us." Kim looked around at his remaining soldiers. After hours of fighting, only 7 humans were left alive. They were all wounded, exhausted, and running low on ammunition. Any sane person would have given up or tried to find a way to escape. Instead, all 7 of them stepped forward and volunteered for the mission. "Sir, I'll take point," said one. "I've got the technical expertise to input the signal," said another. "My rifle's still got 30 rounds, offered a third. They weren't heroes from movies or books. They were tired, scared people who had watched their entire world burn, but they had learned something that other species never understood. Sometimes, the only way to win is to accept that you're going to die and focus on taking as many enemies with you as possible." Colonel Kim took 3 soldiers with him for the final mission: Lieutenant Wu Jin, Sergeant Hei Ri, and Corporal Min Qiu. The other 3 humans, Specialists Chanwu, Yunji, and Na Young, stayed behind in the central hub. Their job was to guard the escape route, even though everyone knew nobody would be coming back to use it. The path to Section 1 had become something out of a horror movie. The alien creatures hadn't just broken into this part of the station. They had completely changed it. They had grown new corridors through the metal walls, creating a maze of living, breathing passages that pulsed like the inside of a giant heart. The walls were made of organic material that moved and shifted constantly. Strange fluids dripped from the ceiling, and the floor felt squishy under their boots like they were walking on skin instead of metal. "Our motion detectors aren't working," Hairi whispered into her radio. "The walls themselves are moving, so we can't tell what's an alien and what's just the building breathing." They had to move by listening carefully and trusting their instincts. Every step took them deeper into what had become the aliens' home base. The air was thick with floating spores that clogged their breathing filters and made their eyes water. It felt like the atmosphere itself was trying to poison them. The 4 humans crept forward with their weapons ready, knowing that around any corner they might run into a group of aliens that would tear them apart in seconds. The walls around them pulsed with a sick, greenish light, and they could hear wet, sliding sounds coming from passages they couldn't see. "There it is," Kim whispered, pointing down the corridor. At the end of the hallway was a massive growth that looked like a giant brain made of meat and cables. Glowing veins ran across its surface in complex patterns, pulsing with information being sent throughout the alien network. This was the main communication hub that controlled all the swarm forces in the area, but between them and their target stood the aliens' best guards. These weren't the regular bioforms they had been fighting. These were elite creatures the size of tanks, covered in armor plating that had deflected every weapon the Alliance had ever used against them. Their claws could cut through steel, and their acid spit could melt through concrete. "Broken Spear final phase," Kim said quietly. "Do it." What happened next wasn't really a battle. It was more like a perfectly choreographed dance of death. The 4 humans moved together, like they had been fighting as a team their entire lives. They covered each other's movements, shared ammunition when someone ran low, and created crossing patterns of gunfire that trapped the aliens in deadly zones. When Lieutenant Wu Jin was hit by alien acid and went down, Sergeant Hairi immediately grabbed his explosive charges and kept moving forward. When Hairi's rifle jammed at the worst possible moment, Corporal Min Qiu stepped in to provide covering fire while she fixed the problem. When Minkyu's armor was torn open by alien claws, Kim dragged him forward so he could still complete the mission. Signal is working, Minkyu gasped as he worked on the alien communication hub. His hands were covered in his own blood, but he kept typing commands into the device. Frequency is locked in, starting the feedback loop now. The effect was immediate and terrible to watch. All throughout the station, alien creatures began shaking and convulsing as their shared mind network turned against itself. Their neural pathways started burning out in a chain reaction that spread from one alien to the next. Kim managed to key his radio with trembling fingers. This is Broken Spear Actual. Mission accomplished. Tell everyone and tell them we kept our word. 20 minutes after the feedback signal started burning through the alien network, something impossible happened in the station's reactor core. The air itself seemed to tear open, and out of the rip in space stepped a creature so massive and terrifying that it barely fit in the huge reactor chamber. This was the Void Swarm Queen, the mother of all the bioforms that had been attacking the station. She was the size of a building, with glowing organs that pulsed with pure hatred and rage. Her presence filled the room with a feeling of dread, so powerful it made the air itself feel heavy and poisonous. Standing between her and the reactor controls were the last three human defenders, specialists Chan Wu, Yunji, and Na Young. All three were badly wounded and exhausted beyond belief. They were staying upright only because of combat drugs pumping through their systems and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. "Well," Chan Wu said, trying to lift his rifle even though his arms were shaking from blood loss, "this is definitely something new." The Queen was so massive that she had to crouch to fit in the reactor room. Her psychic power pressed against their minds like a crushing weight. When she spoke, her voice didn't come through their ears. It spoke directly to the fear centers of their brains. "You are the last of your kind," she projected into their thoughts. "When you die, your entire species will be extinct." "Lady," Yunji replied, checking how much ammunition she had left. Only 4 bullets remained. "You clearly haven't been paying attention to how humans work." Na Young was already at the reactor's manual control panel, her fingers flying over the buttons and switches. The feedback signal they had created was already destroying alien forces throughout the local area, but she knew she could make it even stronger. The reactor's quantum field generators could amplify the signal and send it much further across space. "I will devour your worlds, consume your memories, and erase every trace that your species ever existed," the Queen continued, her mental voice growing louder and more threatening. "Yeah?" Chan Wu raised his rifle and fired his last 4 bullets directly into the Queen's central body mass. The shots barely made tiny scratches on her organic armor, but he smiled anyway. "You'll have to wait in line behind everyone else who's tried to kill us." The Queen let out a roar of rage and struck out with tentacles that crackled with bioelectric energy. Her claws were the size of swords, and they moved faster than anything that large should be able to move. But Na Young had finished her work at the reactor controls. As the Queen's deadly claws reached toward the 3 humans, Na Young pressed the final button that would amplify their signal through the station's power core. The feedback pulse that exploded out of Kepler Station's reactor was like nothing anyone had ever seen before. It didn't just destroy the alien forces around the station. It traveled through the quantum-connected networks that linked alien bioforms across 3 entire star systems. Across space, queen forms and coordination nodes began burning out in a chain reaction of neural death. The signal jumped from one alien network to another, spreading like a virus through their shared consciousness. Entire fleets of bioships went dark as their controlling minds were destroyed. The Queen in the reactor core felt every single death as her network collapsed around her. Her final scream of rage and agony echoed not just through the station, but through the minds of every surviving alien in the sector. As she collapsed, her last thought was a terrible realization. The humans had never been fighting to survive. They had been fighting to take the entire swarm down with them. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Station, something amazing had happened. The destroyed station had become like a holy place that people traveled across the galaxy to visit. Every day, ships from different Alliance worlds arrived to see the twisted metal and alien remains that marked where humans had made their final stand. The station had been partially rebuilt, and Commander Talin now sat in the new command center, reading reports that came in from all over the galaxy. The feedback pulse that the human soldiers had created didn't just destroy the aliens around Kepler Station, it had crippled swarm operations in 17 different star systems. Entire fleets of bioships were now floating dead in space, their controlling minds burned out by the signal. But something even more important was happening. The fighting methods that the humans had used at Kepler Station were spreading to other Alliance forces. Military commanders across the galaxy were learning to fight like humans, not to save equipment or reduce casualties, but to cause as much damage to the enemy as possible, no matter what it cost. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're getting an incoming message. It's using the old Earth military codes." Talin felt his heart start beating faster. "Put it on the main screen." A hologram appeared, showing a human woman wearing patched-up battle armor. Her face was covered with the same kind of scars that all swarm survivors seemed to have: burn marks, claw scratches, and the hard look in her eyes of someone who had seen too much death. "This is Colonel A-Ra Choi of Terran Resistance Cell. Gamma 7, we heard what happened at Kepler Station." Talin leaned forward in his chair. "Colonel Choi, how many humans are still alive out there?" She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who was planning something terrible for their enemies. "Enough of us survived. We've been hiding in dead solar systems, getting stronger, learning how the swarm works. The battle reports from Kepler Station have been very helpful to our planning. What kind of help do you need from us?" "We don't need help, Commander. We're not here to ask for anything. We're here to offer our assistance to you. The swarm thinks they wiped out all humans, but all they really did was teach us the proper way to die in battle. Now we're going to teach them what that means." The transmission ended, leaving Talin staring at empty space where the hologram had been. But all across the galaxy, similar messages were being received by other Alliance commanders. Humans were coming out of hiding, and each group had learned the same lesson that the defenders of Kepler Station had died to prove. The Void Swarm had made a huge mistake. They thought that destroying Earth meant they had destroyed human determination and fighting spirit. But human will to fight, it turned out, was much harder to kill than planets. In the dark spaces between star systems, scattered groups of human survivors were continuing their war. They carried with them the memory of what happened at Kepler Station and the knowledge that sometimes the only way to win is to make sure your enemy loses everything, even if you don't survive either. The story spread throughout the galaxy. Defeat was certain until battle-scarred human soldiers arrived. Species that had never even heard of Earth began whispering a new phrase in their own languages. It roughly translated to the human concept of no prisoners, no surrender, no mercy. The swarm had accidentally created their own worst nightmare. Humans who had nothing left to lose and all the time in the universe to make their enemies pay for what they had done.